And my journey is not what you would anticipate, given the colour of my skin and my background, because I'm a man, and this is something that very rarely touches men, and it certainly didn't touch me in my life. But it needs to be said, I think, that we are merely touching the top of the surface here, and you are merely skimming the top of the surface here. And if anybody thinks that this is not an issue that is affecting you, affecting people in your districts or your boroughs, well, you are deluding yourself. And it's something, quite frankly, that we had to come to terms with some years ago now, and we're only at the beginning, I think, of our own journey. In terms of my personal journey, I am chief prosecutor in the United Kingdom. I am a lawyer, and most people don't like lawyers. I remember having a conversation with my father, God bless him, he's passed away now, but he said to me, you only need lawyers to protect you from other lawyers. And he was right. And, but I pursued my career. I became a prosecutor more than 20 years ago. Yes, I don't look it. And I progressed through the ranks. I was very fortunate to be working in London, and it gave me the opportunity to work on some very, very high-profile cases, which you can read about at your leisure. And I progressed into the senior management ranks maybe a decade ago, but about 7 or 8 years ago, I was constantly organising conferences on criminal justice issues, everything from airport crime, sports crime, gang crime. And this was another area where victims and witnesses came to me and said, Nazir, we don't really talk about this subject, nobody does, and you need to. And so I organised, as has been alluded to, a conference nearly 8 years ago now, and I was blown away, literally, by the reaction to that conference. What I mean by that is that that same day, I did 31 interviews on national and international television and radio. I had, clapping. I had a tremendous amount of interest, but it was mainly around this is really exotic, isn't it? You know, surely this doesn't happen here. And my job then became to try and persuade people that it does happen here and the scale of it, as in the United Kingdom, as in the United States. And unlike the other areas of criminal justice, which I do have responsibility for, this was an area that I did feel very passionate about. And it was largely because women's groups, it's mainly women that work in this field, would turn around to me and say there are very few men speaking about this subject. We need male role models, we need male champions to start addressing this issue. And there you go. And I think that was that played a significant part in my decision to speak about this, to do something about it. It wasn't enough to have started the debate. It was important that we actually try to do something about it. And then when we looked at my own personal background, my family, as you probably heard, came from the northwest frontier of Pakistan. Before I was born, a town you might know, Abtabad. Do you remember? And I didn't even know it was there either. So, you know, they moved to the United Kingdom just before I was born. I was very fortunate to be living in a very large community. It gave me the opportunities that I would not have had if I had stayed. Simple as that. But the point was that the women in my community, certainly the women in my family, never talked about this subject. The men in my family never ever experienced this issue. I've been married 3 times. I have a failure to report. My first wife was a good Muslim boy. My first wife was Catholic. My second was Hindu, and my third was Sikh. So I've done my bit for multi-faith engagement. But on every single occasion, it was met with a shrug. Oh, there he goes again. But you can rest assured that in many families, that's not the reaction you would get, and particularly the women in those families would not get that reaction. So whether that suggests modernisation, or whether that suggests, I don't know, relief, that at least is happy. The reality was that women experience this on a day-to-day basis, men generally pass it by as if they're just driving past. And so from my perspective, it was important, I think, to raise its profile. And I need to understand it first. Now, you heard from Ayaan the sort of the international definition of what honor violence is. But what I tend to say, generally, when I speak to law practitioners and to people working in this field, is that this is quite simple. This is about male power. This is about men thinking they can control every aspect of females' behavior. And in doing so, that women bear the consequences entirely, or I think we've already heard that, of the shame of the family. You know, it might be that a man is responsible, but it was your fault. It wouldn't have happened without you. And women bear the consequences. And I think that when you talk about power and control, that's what you've got to reflect upon. When somebody asks me what it is, I say this is, or these are behaviours and crimes in the name of the Father, the Son, and the blessed male members of the family, the Holy Trinity. That's what it is. It's about men literally exerting their power over women and women's responsibilities. And I think that when you appreciate that, you get a better feel for what we're dealing with here. Now, as far as we're concerned in the United Kingdom, victims and survivors have driven the agenda. You know, it may well be that I'm fortunate to have some influence, but they have told me what needs to happen. They have told me how we should respond. And that's quite frankly how you should work too. Anyway, if you try and create something that you think is the answer, you can rest assured it will be the wrong answer. But if victims and survivors tell you this is what we need, then you're rest assured that's something that will actually make a difference to how things will be approached. Now, as far as our country is concerned, we flag this. So our police forces flag this on their case management system. We as an organisation flag it on our case management system. So we know that in the United Kingdom there are roughly 12 honour killings a year. That's one every month. That's shocking. Even then, we anticipate that to be a significant underestimate, because we also recognise that there is exporting for murder, where people are taken abroad and killed abroad, and they don't necessarily figure in our figures. So that's the headline figure, if quite a better term. If you want to extrapolate it on the basis of your own counties and districts, 6 cases in Queens, you're talking about 60,000 cases probably in Queens, but you won't know until you start looking. Then, when we looked at other types of behaviours that are honour-related, we recognise that not only is it forced marriage, it's abductions, it's forced imprisonments, it's kidnappings, it's sexual assaults, it's assaults of very other nature. These are all motivated by these types of behaviour. And so you are now talking about thousands, certainly we are in our country, talking about thousands of victims and potential victims being harmed by people who claim to love them the most, their own families. And so when you've got that picture, you get a better picture, I would guess, I hope you get, about your communities. That you are not talking about the isolated, you're talking about much more specific, much greater numbers certainly than we anticipated. And then there was a BBC survey about 5 years ago where young South Asian, young Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Sri Lankan men were asked, would they do this? And 1 in 10 said yes, they would. And it goes back to what Ayaan was saying, the difference between DV, domestic violence, and this, is that you have a wide group of people that think it's right. And 1 in 10, from our perspective, would fill the Yankee Stadium, if there is a Yankee Stadium. We're talking about 80,000, 100,000 people that would happily kill a member of their family in the name of honour in the United Kingdom. That's an enormous number of people. I can't think of another crime, quite frankly, where you would have that sort of wide support for it in community members. Now, it also is necessary, as Ayaan has indicated, to have some perspective about your own personal safety. I've had death threats, in fact I had a petition calling for my death, which I signed. You've got to realise and recognise that there are people out there that don't want you to say what you want to say, that don't want you to work in this field, that there are, and they are, I would say the minority, but they're a loud minority. They're probably a strong minority in the sense that they have greater influence than their numbers. But you've got to recognise that if you get involved in this area, this is an area where there may be some personal cost. That said, the women that work in this field already are suffering all the time anyway. We in the United Kingdom, they get abuse, criminal damage, violence, threats, all sorts of things aimed at them just because they are helping other victims. And so, men, I think you'd be able to recognise that you're just merely touching the subject. You need to recognise there will be a personal cost to you. And we recognise it also as not just an issue of women's rights, this is clearly an issue of human rights. Do we not agree? It is. about whether you have the right to live your own life in the way that you would choose to live your own life. And it's in that context that we need to address our own failings. Now let me tell you, in terms of the journey, I did not understand how big it was. The research that we carried out in the United Kingdom shows that most victims are likely to be between the ages of 15 and 24. That said, the youngest, we have a civil protection available to victims from forced marriage. The youngest person protected from and prevented from having a forced marriage was 8 years old, and the oldest is 55 years old. So the span goes beyond the 15 to 24. We recognise that 80% of perpetrators are men, that means that 20% are women. We also know that 1 in 8 involved a father killing or harming their own daughter. At the same time, 1 in 9 honor killings in the United Kingdom were carried out by hitmen. And when I use the term hitmen, I don't mean hitmen in the sense that you might see in Sopranos. What we're talking about is people who will do it without money. They'll do it for kudos, for status, because they think it's the right thing to do. It'll make them feel so much better within their communities. In the Banas case that Ayaan mentioned, 2 of the individuals, when they fled the country, went to Iraq, and they were celebrated in their villages for what they had done. That's what you're up against. Right? So, honor killings are a big issue for us, but we also recognise that in at least 1 in 3 of our killings that we've dealt with, there was an opportunity for intervention to prevent it from happening in the first place. So a third of people could have been saved if we had done something differently, or done something at all. Then we looked at the hidden nature of this, and I think Ayaan alluded to this earlier on as well, about suicide. Suicide is the get-out for women who think that the only way that they can prevent dishonouring their family and suffering harm is to take their own lives. And there are some really horrible examples, but let me give you some figures. When we looked at whale suicides in the United Kingdom, in 1 year, 2007, there were 240 whale suicides. People jumping in front of trains. 1/3 of them were from the South Asian community. And yet the South Asian community make up 4% of the population. What does that tell you? And in many of those instances, you have very high-profile cases of women jumping in front of the train, holding their children, as they did. That is how serious we're talking about. When we did some more research, we found that South Asian women were 3 times as likely as white women to kill themselves in the United Kingdom. In fact, there's only one other group in our society, in the United Kingdom, which has that same figure. And that's people who are returning from Iraq and Afghanistan as soldiers. So they're in a war zone in their homes, those guys are in a war zone where they are. That is what we're up against. And that's why they choose, as they have to choose, unfortunately, to take their lives. But they shouldn't have to do that. Now, one of the things we are doing, and one of the things we have done, is we changed the law. And it was a case I dealt with 4 or 5 years ago now, which now establishes in British law that if you drive someone to commit suicide through your behaviour, you are guilty of manslaughter. And that puts some responsibility on you for doing what you're doing. We didn't have that law, or didn't have that ability until 5 years ago. And so that's really one little small thing you can do, really, in order to tackle this issue. We talked about forced marriage, and the forced marriage, I think we all recognise it, do we? Forced marriage can be where violence is applied. Forced marriage can be where violence is applied. Forced marriage can be where emotional blackmail is applied, and that's probably the most common, actually, where you're brought up to think that men are the answer when men aren't even one of the questions, you know, and you're made to think that way, that you've got to do exactly what your family tells you to do. And there are many instances of women who run away from home, and then their families somehow communicate to them that your mother has had a heart attack, you must come back. And she comes back, and I've discovered that forced marriage is one of the best cures for heart disease ever. You know, suddenly she's fine. You know, but they've done what they need to do to get you back into your home environment. So there's the emotional blackmail, there's the duress, there is the all that pressure you can put on. There's even deception where you're shown a picture of a man who will be your groom and he looks like Tom Cruise, and you end up marrying somebody who looks like me. You know? So you've got all manner of things that would potentially lead to forced marriages. And then you also need to recognise, I think maybe that's not clear today so far, is that forced marriage is the beginning of someone's suffering. No, because when they become forced marriage, then you've got sexual abuse, then you've got domestic violence, then you may have suicide and self-harm, then you will have child protection issues, you will have all sorts of things that flow from that. And the image I'd like to leave you there with is that the forced marriage is the earthquake, what follows is the tsunami. And we know how much damage a tsunami causes. So you need to recognize that when somebody says, oh, they're already forced into marriage, nothing we can do. No, there's plenty you can do, plenty we must do, because of all the impact that will follow that forced marriage. So one needs to recognize that too. Now we've also looked at some more triggers. In the United Kingdom we had hundreds of young girls who were just disappearing from school rolls. They were taken out by their families. I don't know what the law is on that in this country. But basically children must go to school until they're age 16 in the United Kingdom. Is it the same here? So why are 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds just disappearing from school? That's what was happening in our environment. And I asked Parliament to consider this, and they did a survey, and they found literally hundreds of girls that had disappeared off the face of the earth. And most of them are probably fine. They're probably at home, or fine in a sort of objective sense, i.e. they're now being treated as slaves at home, but they haven't been harmed yet. They're waiting their forced marriage. But many of them will have suffered significant harm. One of the cases I dealt with only a year ago was the murder of Tulay Goran. Now, Tulay was 15 years old, Turkish girl from North London, and she had wanted to make her own choice in terms of her partner, and that's the last we heard of her. 13 years later, we managed to convict her father of her murder, and we still haven't found Tulay's body. Now, when I did that case, the next day I was doing an interview on BBC television, and I was saying, I don't know how many other unmarked graves there are. Because generally when a child goes missing, who reports that child gone missing? Yeah, so if the family are in part responsible for it, they're not going to report it, are they? So which is where the duty of everybody comes in. The teachers, the local shopkeepers, the neighbours, everybody must ask questions. Begin to ask questions. You're not being a busybody when you do so. You're ultimately protecting individuals, and if nothing comes of it, well, nothing comes of it. But if you don't, Tulay Gorans and many like her will just disappear off the face of the earth. Now, in Tulay's case, as in many cases, we don't have a statute of limitation for homicides. It took, as I said, a dozen years. We had different police teams going in, making close links with the family, and it took eventually the bravery of the mother, who said, I now will tell you what happened, and gave evidence against the father, and were able to get the conviction. I don't know where Tulay is buried. I don't know where she's buried. The point is, we managed to get her justice on the back of the loyalties of families do change over time. So don't write it off and think, well, that's the end of the case. Can't prove it. Can't go back every 2 or 3 years, and you'll rest assured somebody somewhere will finally change their view. The same thing happened in relation to another of my no-body homicides, and that was the murder of Nazir Afzal. Now, Nazir was a customs officer in the United Kingdom. She wanted a divorce. She was persuaded by her mother-in-law to go to India for a family wedding, and we never saw her again. The family said, oh, she's run off with somebody on this 2-week trip. What about her 10-month-old child back in London? Do you really think that she's just going to run off just like that? It took us a decade, eventually, before 2 members of the family, two daughters-in-law, who were able to disclose what had happened, and were able to convict her husband and her mother-in-law of her murder. Again, we've never found Nazir's body. Nazir's body. Now, in that case, very recently, about a year after the murder, in fact, I regularly go to prisons to visit the governor and the like, and I went to the particular prison where she was, and she made a point of blanking me. And do you know how old she was? 74 years old. She will now spend the rest of her life in that prison for what she had done, and she couldn't care less what happens. But when people talk about honour and shame, surely somebody of my mother's age being in prison for the rest of her life would be the most dishonourable and shameful thing that ever happened. But for some reason, they're quite proud of it. They just didn't expect it in court, I suppose, but they're still quite proud of what had happened in relation to that particular case. And then you need to look at other areas of sort of hidden victims. Disability and forced marriage is another area which we've become more and more aware of, particularly children with learning difficulties. In one particular case I'll refer to, she was about 24, and eventually somebody reported the matter to, we have a forced marriage unit in government, and reported this to them because they were a bit concerned about the fact that she was 24 and on her fourth marriage, and yet she couldn't consent to one. And when it was investigated, something like $10,000 was paid over every time to facilitate somebody's immigration into this country. She was literally the family's cash cow. Literally being used. She didn't know what was going on, and she was being used in that respect. And you've got to be aware that disability and people who are disabled are very likely to be victims of forced marriage, and something you need to be conscious of. And we also recognise this in relation to what we call lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender communities. That invariably, when your child decides to come out, the reaction of the family will be, I'm glad you did that, you're getting married tomorrow. And that kind of issue is more prevalent than we imagine it to be. So you need to recognise that sexuality and forced marriage is another trigger, I guess, for that. One of the things that I say to practitioners in this field throughout is one needs to park one's Western prejudices by the door. All your assumptions that you've made need to be parked at the door. Don't apply them. If a young lady, as one did, walks into a police station on Valentine's Day and says, I've been sent a bunch of flowers, my mum and dad want to kill me, now you might think, that's a bit of an exaggerated reaction. No, for her to come to a police station, she must believe it, and therefore you need to act upon that. And there's another lesson we've learned. Believe what they say. Yes, if you start there, you can only unravel it when you get some more evidence. But if you start off with a lack of belief, then rest assured you are putting her at greater risk. And we've learned this escalates very fast. In Samara Nazir's case, Samara was a university graduate. She set up her own recruitment company. Her family were extremely wealthy. They owned a lot of property in West London. And at 10 o'clock on that Saturday morning, she was taken by her mother to her boyfriend. Same faith. You would imagine that shouldn't be a problem, but he came from a different caste. Anyway, she was taken with her mum to this person. Her mum said to this person, would you please let him go, or let her go? I don't know what might happen to her if you don't let her go. And he said, well, I love her. And so at 12 o'clock, it's 2 hours later, she was stabbed 18 times in the presence of two infant nieces who were spattered with her blood. Now, from my perspective, it was very easy to prosecute a 16-year-old cousin, and they very often use the youngest member of the family. Why? Yeah, likely sentence, less to lose, all of those reasons. They very often use 16, but I knew it wasn't him on his own. And so I authorised listing devices, the kinds of things that I would use for mafia-type organised mob crime. I authorised it in that particular case to build a case against the brother and the father. Because they weren't talking, nobody was talking, there was a massive wall of silence around, but they were talking amongst themselves. And we did, successfully. And so you've got to do that. We recognise this. Another area where this differs from domestic violence is the organised nature of it. I can't even think, in the 120 odd cases that my lawyers have dealt with, I can't think of a case that wasn't pre-planned, that wasn't premeditated, that wasn't organised in advance, that didn't involve a wider network of people, that didn't involve the wall of silence that followed. And so it's essential to be aware of all the techniques that are available to you in order to build the strongest cases against the individuals. And that's why it's important to do so, because we don't want anybody to think they can get away with it. Anybody on the edges. In Banaz's case, now, I told you a little bit about Banaz's case. Banaz was married at 16, forced marriage. She came out the other end at 18, battered and bruised. She was seen outside a subway station in London kissing her new boyfriend. Now that, to my mind, is not a criminal offence, and nor is it a capital offence. However, a member of the community saw what had happened, went round to her father's house and said, I just saw this. Father told uncle and father and 6 other men sat around a table not unlike this one that evening and decided that Banaz must die. She was then abducted off the streets of London that next morning, One of the men raped her. She was then strangled, and she was buried in a suitcase more than 100 miles away. Unfortunately, they used a hire car with a tracker. But anyway, we built a strong case against them. We successfully prosecuted uncle and father and a third man, all of whom were given very long sentences of imprisonment. We knew that there were other people involved. We managed to get two of the Iraqis I mentioned extradited from Iraq. There have been only 2 extraditions from Iraq in 83 years, and it was those 2 in relation to a young 20-year-old girl's murder. So when they were successfully prosecuted, we now have 6 grown men in prison for the rest of their lives for the murder of a 20-year-old girl. It is terrible, isn't it? That's what they think they can get away with. That's what they think they should do in those circumstances. From our perspective, anybody involved, that investigation is not over yet, anybody involved, even on the fringes, needs to be brought to justice, because that's the messaging. When Nazir's trial was taking place at the Old Bailey Second Criminal Court, a lot of women were telling us that women were coming into their centres and saying, my family have told me I will be the next Bernaz. The families were using her murder as a threat in relation to their child. So when it came to the prosecution and the subsequent media, we made sure that we did a lot of messaging, a lot of media, a massive communication strategy, in order for us to send out a message saying, if you're involved, you'll pay the penalty. Even if you're remotely involved on the fringes, you'll pay the penalty. And that, I think, is an important message to send out. Don't just go for the easy target. That's too easy. You'll recognise there will be others who are giving some support or some support, and they need to be brought to justice too, as part of the conspiracy that we undoubtedly have seen in many, many cases. And the youngest victim of an honour killing, I don't know how long we've got.
You're fine.
Yeah. The youngest victim of an honour killing in the United Kingdom was 6 years old. And Alicia will never know why she was burned to death. Somebody decided to set fire to her family's home. She didn't escape. 12 members of her family managed to escape. And when we further investigated, we discovered that the reason why her home was set alight was because her elder brother was texting, SMSing a girl from another family. That's it. That was enough to try and kill 12 people and ended up killing a 6-year-old girl. And that, to my mind, gives you an idea of how far they will go. And then, perhaps one of the better examples, I think, of the bizarre nature of this, there was a Sikh man called Dosanjh who decided that, who lost his daughter. She'd run off with a Jewish man, in fact, and he couldn't find either of them. So he decided that what he would do was he would kill the boyfriend's father, which would then flush them out at the funeral, where he would then have them killed. Now, unfortunately for him, if you want a hitman in London, you will get an undercover police officer. And he did. 3 lives were saved. But that's the extent to which he was prepared to go in order to what? To do what? I have no idea. Again, when I said about park your prejudices, park your Western-based logic and all your assumptions, they don't apply to this kind of behavior. These people will go down routes that you could never imagine for reasons that you could never imagine. In terms of, there are male victims, and when we did some research back in 2004, every single male victim revolved around the behavior or perceived behavior of a woman. They didn't want to kill their own daughter, let's kill him instead. You know, and maybe we can wipe it clean in some way, shape or form. So you need to recognise it still revolves around the perceived or perception of women's behavior. When, I'll give you 2 examples of 2 more recent prosecutions. There was a murder of a woman who arrived from Pakistan. She was in an arranged marriage. She was content, as far as we can tell, to be married to this family in the northern part of England. She couldn't speak the language. She knew nobody in this country. In the 5 months that she was here, she was beaten every day by her husband. Eventually, in April of 2007, when she was murdered, the coroner thought she'd been in a road accident. Now again, from my perspective, very easy to prosecute the husband, but it occurred to us, hang on, what about mother-in-law, 2 sisters-in-law and brother-in-law with whom she was living? And we used, and you know, when I talk about whether new legislation is required, I don't know about US law, but certainly as far as we were concerned, we used legislation available to us to prosecute the whole family, eventually, for causing the death of this individual or standing by whilst the individual was killed, because of their duty of care towards her, or the perceived duty of care towards her. and now mother-in-law, 2 sisters-in-law, and brother-in-law are also in jail with the husband. So that's, again, messaging, isn't it? It's about sending out a message saying, you can't stand by and let this happen either. You've got to do something. The Good Samaritan, you've got to do something to prevent this from happening, whomever may actually be doing this to you. Now, I mentioned Tule's case. The most recent murder that I dealt with was only about 3 months ago. That was the murder of Rita Ayaan. Now, Rita wanted a divorce. She was a Sikh woman. She wanted a divorce. And she was on her way to pick up her a 7-year-old, 8-year-old child from a childminder. And as she was walking up the road, she was attacked by a man with a machete who, in the process of her trying to protect herself, her arm was chopped off, but she was killed. And they then made their escape. We were able to understand who it was that was responsible. The husband of Rita tried to put himself in a pub where there was CCTV at the relevant time to give him an alibi. But of course, unfortunately, it didn't work because mobile phone technology also helps tremendously. And we were able to build a case against the husband. We built a case against the 18-year-old boy that carried out the act. We built a case against the 2 people in the car with them, 4 people convicted for her murder. And again, there's the messaging that we will do and have done in relation to that case. But one needs to recognise again, why didn't he just let her divorce him? You know, what was it? You know, I tend to think this is about weak individuals. And it, literally, you know, Kenzie's strong. But this is about his weakness. He couldn't be seen to lose face in the community because she wanted to let him go, you know, rather than he wanted to let her go. And the consequences in that case, the 18-year-old boy had only arrived from India 5 months before the murder. So he brings with him all his baggage, all his prejudices, all his traditional ways or cultural views, and was easy fry, literally, to be used in relation to that particular case. But again, as I said to you, you've got to look beyond the individual's concern. And then people tend to use faith as a justification. You know, how do you learn about your faith? Invariably, you learn about your faith from your parents. So if your parents tell you that your faith says you must do everything I say, you believe it, unless there's some other information source available to you to tell you different. Now, in one particular case, which you may have heard about, there was an actress in the Harry Potter films, a Muslim actress, who was caught on the phone by her brother making a phone call to her Hindu boyfriend. Her brother attacked her very vigorously on the basis that somehow, he told her, you are diluting our faith in what you are doing. When it came to his trial, he pleaded guilty, and he did so, and this is the good Muslim boy that he was, he did so on the basis that he couldn't remember a thing he had done because he was drunk. Now, explain to me what bit of his faith allows him to do that. So, you know, they will use whatever they have, even if it was and it's something they saw on Disney, they will use it in order to try and justify their behaviour towards individuals. In my view, this is gender terrorism. This is gender terrorism because it's about trying to create a climate of fear to make women conform. Isn't that what it is? And so you've got to recognise that that's what we're looking at and what we're dealing with. And it's not dying out with generations. I thought that it would die out with a generation, my generation. I was talking not long ago to a young man, 21-year-old man, who told me, Nazir, don't you understand, he said. He said, man is a piece of gold. Woman is a piece of silk. If you drop a piece of gold in mud, you can wipe it clean. If you drop a piece of silk in mud, it's stained forever. That is his attitude to women. You can talk to him about dry cleaning till the cows come home. That is how he perceives women are and women should be treated. And that is what informs his attitude to women. And so the answer to this, the ultimate answer to this, is education. The awareness that Hara talking about today that you are working on. And it's about doing education as early as possible. You know, when you're 18, I'm guessing some of you are 18 in this room, when you're 18, you're set in your views and your ways. You know, it takes a lot for you to change your attitudes and the way you behave. But when you're in kindergarten, when you're in early school years, that's when you need to talk to people about the rights of men and women. That's when you need to talk about human rights more generally. That's when you need to share with them this kind of thing. When I was giving very recently, I give evidence all the time to parliamentary committees in the United Kingdom. The last time I gave evidence, I talked to them about a school production of Oliver that was going around schools in London. Do you know Oliver? Yeah, Oliver Twist. And you know that Nancy gets murdered by Bill Sykes in a sort of power and control scenario. For some reason, that did not happen in this production. The view being taken by those who were distributing it around the schools was, we don't want to talk to children about this. We don't want them to see this kind of behaviour. The reality is, and we know this, that 1 in 4 of them will be experiencing it at home. Surely there's a missed opportunity. You use that production, or productions like it, to talk to them about this issue, in the hope that they will disclose, in the hope that they will realise that something needs to be done about it, rather than pretend and wrap them up in cotton wool and pretend it's not happening. And you'll be glad to know that production is not going anywhere anytime soon. Nancy must die. That's the view I take about that production, and it's worked no end. We'll work closely with every agency. We can't do this alone. We have to work with the NGO sector, the women's sector, because whilst we will prosecute thoroughly, we know our role is also in prevention. And our role in prevention involves education. Our role in prevention involves national police guidance. We have, if you check on the ACPO, Association of Chief Police Officers, UK website, you will see that we have the first ever national police guidelines, minimum standards for any police force in the world. In the Forced Marriage Act, which was created in 2007, we have the first of its kind anywhere in the world. In my specialist prosecutors, I have more than 30 prosecutors around the country. It's not their full-time job, but they are experts in this field, and they've been trained by the NGO sector, the first of their kind anywhere in the world. We have a national hotline, which is not, I was talking to Amanda, it's not a call centre, it's a group of very experienced victims, survivors, who are available on a rota system with a dedicated phone number, who are able to provide support and assistance to individuals. And again, when you look, where you find. We found that hotline had more than 3,000 calls in its first few months. And that's where we're talking about. Yeah, it doesn't take a lot of money to support it, but you ultimately need things like that to enable you to proceed. And people will say, well, you've done all this, you've got everything in place, why did she die? And they're right. I go back to what I said right at the beginning, that this is a journey. The journey means that we will make mistakes, that we will ensure that some people get away with it. That internationally, and we do work internationally, we get tremendous support from countries around the world who provide us with support, provide us with the suspects sometimes, certainly provide us with the ability to get the evidence. But that, to my mind, is only the beginning. We're working across Europe. What you're doing today is absolutely fantastic in raising awareness for the first time, in my knowledge anyway, in the United States. And that's a testament to you at the heart, a testament to everybody in this room for putting so much effort into something. Because you are doing something that will ultimately save lives. People have said to me, Nazir, why are you so optimistic? And I say, I save a life every day. Surely that is a reason to be optimistic, And in terms of challenges, you will get community leaders that pay lip service to what you say, that are two-faced. Can't tell you the number of hours I've wasted in the company of people who listen to my views or who tell me how wonderful they are in what they're doing, and then seconds later, they aren't. So it's important to identify champions within the communities. One of the things I've learned as well, and this is maybe some good advice for you, is about peer-to-peer stuff. Children don't listen to me anymore. My children don't listen to me anymore. But children listen to other children. Young people listen to young people. Build up a cadre of young champions. Young men and women who are able to go out and talk about this subject. They've done that in Sweden. We're doing that in the United Kingdom. And thereby you raise people's expectations and knowledge levels from people that they're prepared to listen to. I think that's an easy win for you, I hope. But you've got to identify those champions, and you've got to challenge community leaders day in, day out, who are not speaking about this subject. And I've heard this many times. They are the silent majority, they say. And they are the problem, quite frankly. And you've got to win them over. And you don't do that by sledgehammer, you do that by charming, by supporting, by giving awareness to individuals who will do it on your behalf. And we have got a very large cadre of people now that are prepared to speak out on this subject. And other challenges we have, do you call it sat-nav? We have the sat-nav generation. The satellite. We have the satellite navigation generation. Yeah, that's a big word. But basically the one that has to be guided everywhere they go. And then we have the iPod generation, the one that chooses only to listen to what wants to listen to. And so you've got to find means of being able to get to these individuals. You've got to signpost them so they get some information. You've got to be able to give them messages they're prepared to listen to. You've got to get young people, celebrities, people with influence to speak on this subject. We're very fortunate. We've always had a government and governments who are prepared to talk about this subject, who talk to me about this subject, who are prepared to do something about this subject because they can see the benefits in doing so. And to my mind, whilst you have that, you can do that very easily simply by building a business case for this. And the business case is that you save lives. And you can save lives on a regular basis. In my opinion, there's no such thing as right or left, moderate or extremist. There's only open and closed. Those who are open-minded, those who are closed-minded. And you've got to somehow get around those people whose minds are closed. So we work with children. We work with communities. We make sure that our investigators and prosecutors are properly trained in order to deal with these kinds of cases. I work and I pay enormous tribute to the women who work in this field, for their courage, for their tenacity, for everything they do, because they've taught me everything I know about this subject. And whilst we have women who are valued less, who are overworked, who are not schooled, who are not allowed to work, who are subjected to violence on a daily basis, then the potential of our society, of our communities, will never be realised. That, to my mind, is the strongest business case for this. We've got to make sure that we work together. And I say this to all of you in closing, that I don't know of any bureaucracy in the world that has made the world better. What I do know is that individuals make the world better. And that each one of you now is tasked to do this. And I hope that you will. Thank you very much. There is a national hotline, which, as I said, staffed by survivors on a rotor basis, something like 3,000 to 4,000 calls a year. Each county police force, and this is why this is good news for you, don't wait for a national strategy. You can do this yourself. This is about leaders locally doing this. There are county police forces that run their own hotline in the same way, staffed by police officers on a rota, and they will have, I'll give you one example, there's a part of the northeast of England where there are, I think the question that I asked earlier on about Ayaan, there isn't a big community there. There isn't a big community there, but in the 3 months the hotline was in existence, the first 3 months, there were 350 calls to it. So where you look is where you find. The hotline doesn't have to be sophisticated, it simply requires some resource and some time. In terms of how we rescue people, about a decade ago now, 7 or 8 years ago, the government, working across, in your case with the State Department and the Home Department, decided that there was a need for what we have now, the Forced Marriage Unit, which is staffed by caseworkers. Their job is to, again, there's a dedicated hotline, you can check it online, and that hotline enables girls, in effect young women, to ring when they are either going through a forced marriage or taken abroad for one or at risk of one. And what the FMU will do is, in some cases, they'll certainly alert our consulates and our consular officials in whatever country they're going to. They will give the individual a secret mobile phone, for example. Password. This is a key bit of learning from our point of view. If I ring you up and say, "Are you okay?" and you say, "You are," how do I know that somebody not next to you with a gun to your head or a knife to your head saying, "Let's say you're okay"? So we give victims passwords, which only they will know, so that they will tell us whatever that password is, and they will know if they've got somebody with them or not. We have a dedicated rescue squad using our embassy staff around the world, and when we become aware somebody is at imminent risk, we will rescue that person. And that involves working with, for example, Pakistani police, Pakistani government, Indian government, whoever it may be, going into the village, literally going into the village, taking it out of the house, getting it back in the car, and getting it back to the United Kingdom as fast as is humanly possible. And we will do that 450 times a year. That is a lot of people. It's the nearest thing to James Bond that we have, I think. Their job is fantastic. But the bizarre thing is the speed of response, it's the coordination of the response, it's the international cooperation that exists in those cases. I don't care what their agenda is. It may well be, I said to Amanda last night, if people are doing some good work for us, I don't care if their agenda is political, ideological, financial, whatever it may be, as long as we save the individual concerned. And so, forced marriage, I think the Canadians want to create something very similar. Again, it's not expensive. 6 caseworkers amounts to whatever, how many $100,000, $500,000, and then using your consular officials abroad and training them up to take this responsibility. And if we've got 450 that we rescue every year, you've got several thousand. Any questions?
Thank you so much for coming. The ladies that are at threat of being killed by their family members, do many of them choose to stay in the UK, or do they wish to go to another country entirely where their family might suspect or be?
Okay. We have risk assessments. I'm sure you have risk assessments. And if they are at great risk, i.e. if they're at imminent dangerous risk, then we can give them a new identity. We can take them to a new part of the country. Very rarely would we take them abroad. I've talked with, if we move a Brit to Germany, they want to come back. No disrespect to Germany. You're familiar with the areas that you're familiar with. So, bizarrely, we sent one young lady to Scotland from London, and she wanted to come back. She knew nothing about the way Scotland was operating. She didn't like it. So we put her at greater risk by doing that. So we'll find somewhere for her. We'll give her anonymity. Important point about anonymity, I think it was made earlier on. There are people in officialdom that are party to this in some way, shape, or form. We will have police officers who have access to databases who are close to families. We will have people who have national insurance numbers. I don't know what the equivalent is here. Employment numbers, so they know when somebody's restarted work. We have bounty hunters, people who are happy to trace on behalf of the family. And so we will make sure that you put in place a lot of manual, don't put it on databases, keep it as manual as possible in those particular cases, otherwise you are at risk of access to those information. But again, they're learning from our side. For example, we would put them, initially the police would put them in a cab, a taxi, to take them to the refuge. The taxi driver would ring the family and say, I know where she is. We would use interpreters that came from the community and the family. Literally giving them the information on a plate. But that's all learning. You will learn from all those experiences. So in the worst cases, we will give them anonymity and new identities. In others, we will give them different types of protection available to them in order for them to feel safe.
I've been involved in the issue of fighting sex trafficking in New York City. And as a parallel, one of the problems that we've found is that not all DA's offices are the same in terms of aggressive prosecution, and that the training is very scattered, the training of police officers in terms of how to identify people and what to do. And I would think the same thing would exist in terms of trying to enforce a law against honor killings. And I'm wondering if you have any suggestions of how to bring about more active enforcement.
But the first contact is the most important contact. That first person can't send them away. I keep asking, when I was in the United Kingdom, I tend to ask any venue that I'm at, the person on reception, do they know what they're looking at? Because generally, if a woman's just escaped, she will go into anywhere that looks like authority. She'll turn up at John Jay University, for example, and say to the guy at reception, I'm about to be forced into marriage, I need some help. And the guy says, what? You're putting it at greater danger. So the level of awareness will vary depending on the level of contact. What we have done, and what the police have done, is DVDs. There is as part of the Association of Chief Police Officers guidance that was issued in 2008, we also developed a 20-minute DVD which every frontline police officer in the United Kingdom has to view in their first year. That was 125,000 police officers had to see that video. It has me in it, that's by the way. But the reality is that they saw this. It was a casework scenario based on a case and gave them that kind of information. So there was the blatant, compulsory 20-minute DVD training when you're at parade. I don't know if you have parade. Before an officer goes out, you need to see this, and they all have to have it as part of their development. Then we use the more surreptitious means. At training schools in the United Kingdom, They go through various case studies as part of their training. We made sure that at least one of those case studies was a forced marriage, one-based violence scenario. So every new police officer, without them even knowing it, is being trained in this field as well. So you can, there are all sorts of means available to you. There is, you see the Dan Martin thing, there's a BBC television series, documentary based on 2 years of following people around. That's due for broadcast in August. We will use the media, we will use our training manuals, we'll do it with prosecutors, we'll do joint training. I always say, I said to Amanda last night, it's important that any joint training also involves the non-governmental sector, get them in together, working together, collaborate, and raise awareness levels that way. But it's literally relentless and persistent. The more you do, the easier it will become. You will still have people that haven't got it yet, but hopefully they'll be in a minority. In other cases, it will be more challenging. Again, another attitude thing. I was talking to a father a few years ago who told me that his son had gone to prison for crack dealing, 6 years in prison for crack dealing, and his daughter wanted to marry somebody of her own choice, and what dishonor she was bringing on his family. That's what we're up against. People who are in total denial about the issue. And when they're in total denial, you've got to expose them, I think. I would happily go to wherever that individual works, or wherever that individual thinks is important, and say, do you know what he's been saying? And literally, I think that's the challenging that you've got to do. In many cases, it is ignorance. And when it's ignorance, it's about the awareness. Where you've got to tell them, you can't say that you're any better than my daughter. Well, you've got to have that conversation, almost on a one-to-one basis. And I say it's about small steps. I think every day, if you have that conversation with one person, by the end of the year, you're 365 months.
I know you mentioned that you go after more than just the obvious person who's the shooter, and you go and get the family, 6 people, mother-in-law, etc. How much time do they have?
It varies. In Sergeant's case, this is another bit of our journey. We mentioned, she's not here now, you're going to hear from the victims afterwards. And in 2001, there was a murder in England called the Hirsi. She was murdered by her father, because she had a boyfriend. And the judge, on his conviction for murder, said, I understand how it must have felt for you. And I have to give you life, but I will give you the minimum tariff. There was such an outcry that ever since then, there's been an acknowledgement in terms of sentencing that it's an aggravating circumstance, not a mitigating circumstance. For heaven's sake, who can a child turn to if not their parent? So if you have breached that trust, you should get a bigger sentence. And so in all the murders I've talked about, the minimum tariff is 28 years. They will go to prison for a minimum of 28 years before they can be considered for parole. Even that grandmother I showed you was 74 years. And in some cases where they're on the periphery, that will depend upon their involvement. So there will undoubtedly be some reduction depending on their involvement. But if they are the prime motivator, in the Peter Allen case I told you, the husband was so far away, giving himself an alibi, etc., actually, because he made these people do it, he got the biggest sentence of all.
Can you talk about Sharia law in regards to, does that come into play at all in the UK?
We had a discussion a couple of years ago where there was a groundswell of opinion that suggested that we would allow mosques, in effect, to deal with this issue, or some of the low-level issue. If there's but we made it very clear, we as prosecutors made it very clear to the government that this was not going to happen. If there is somebody disclosing domestic violence or violence in the home, that's a police matter, not a matter for them. And certainly, as far as we're aware, at the highest levels of the Sharia councils, they've accepted that. But I can't guarantee that there aren't places in the United Kingdom where these kinds of behaviours are still being tolerated or being dealt with at that level. We also make it very clear that there's no rule for mediation in these matters. If a child leaves home because she's at risk, I can rest assured that family will say absolutely everything to get back, anything to get her back. And when she's back in their clutches, you need to recognise that she's at tremendous risk. So we don't allow mediation, we don't allow mosques or temples or gurdwaras to mediate. We don't want that. We make it very clear that's wrong, and we expose them when they do.
Hello, I'm Indian myself, and I think that one of the largest issues that I've seen working with DV, domestic violence victims of South Asian descent, is the idea of fatalism. They feel that this is something that maybe due to karma or whatever it may be, this is what I have to deal with in life. Do you see a lot of that, and how do you deal with that issue? Because that's not only the community, that's also the victim feeling that way, so they may not come out.
But it goes back to the fact that these individuals have been brought up that way. They have been made to think and believe that there's only one way their life should go, and that's simply to forcibly get married and then to move into that particular that life, live with that life. And we've got to do more about that. So in those individual cases, I think once you've quickly had a conversation with them, they realise, certainly in my experiences, they realise that it is wrong. What they don't want is to get their families into trouble, particularly, which is why there's a big debate in the United Kingdom about criminalisation of forced marriage. We have lots of protection orders available, which are civil protection orders, which carry a contempt penalty if they are breached. But they don't necessarily want to get their parents into prison if it's criminalised. You've got it's literally one can't generalise about this. We need, and we do have, very many faith leaders who are prepared to come and speak with us, speak to them, saying there's nothing in your religion that allows this to happen, and you can't allow this to happen. And of course, the biggest business case, quite frankly, is who's suffering? The whole community is suffering. I remember having this conversation with the Bangladeshi community, and 50% of Bangladeshi women don't go to school in the United Kingdom. And I said, well, how can that be? Why would you allow that to happen? Because there's no hope for your community to advance. Your whole community will be mired in poverty and low-income lifestyle and poor education. And I think you've got to win them over in that sense to get the community leaders on your side. But it's very difficult, you're right. So you're getting your money's worth. I'm not getting paid for this, are you?
I'm just wondering if you have any ideas about how to change mindsets in this country so that we can propose legislation or try to get legislation. How do you begin to have that dialogue in this country?
You need to identify representatives, people in government, people in local government that you can work on, really. That's what we did in the United Kingdom. Once we identified the scale of the problem, once we identified what might be available to do, we need to get champions on our side. And I said to Amanda last night, sometimes you've got to give them the credit for it, because they need to get re-elected, I guess. I'm not elected. So they need to be given that kind of impetus. If you want to organise your next conference, tell them I'll do it in your constituency, win them over. Literally, you've got to play on their selfishness, I guess, sometimes. But the ultimate answer is the business case. Surely you don't want one of these to happen on your watch in your area. And when you've done that, and when you identify who your champions are, the learning is already out there. The Swedish peer-to-peer work I told you about, we just nicked it. We stole it off the Swedes. And the Forced Marriage Act, well, that was ours, but I think others are nicking it, others are stealing it. We're happy to share good practice. We don't need you. You don't need to start from scratch.
There was a paradigm shift when, in England, when citizens began seeing the slave ships around slavery. And I'm just wondering what would be comparable in the 21st century to forced marriages and honor killings and sex trafficking and all of those horrors.
My own experience is that it's fear that drives legislators to do something. I remember when I first started giving evidence to Parliament and to our government half a dozen years ago. They asked me about, I mentioned to them about kids going missing from schools. I mentioned that the reason I did that was in the same week we had that Austrian guy who had all his family underneath his house, remember? And they said, "You're not telling us that's happening here." I said, "How do I know?" But you put that thought in their head, do you really want this to come out in terms of this event or this impact that it would have how people perceive you. And slowly but surely, they began to play ball. But literally, it's one event at a time, one case at a time. I hate to say this, milk it for all it's worth, because the families are doing that. The victims need protection from us, protection as well. So we've got to, big it up. You use the phrase, big it up? We've got to big it up. We've got to make people understand how important this is. We've got to use the media. It's very easy now in the kingdom. I think it is for you now, with Dan Rava having done what he did. I think it's much easier now for you to do that. I'm meeting with a film production company next week, and they want to do a feature film about an honor-based violence case. I'm an advisor to Law and Order, the UK version television series, and one of their episodes was based around this. So we use every means at our disposal. Just keep it in people's faces. If you keep it in their faces, eventually they seem to think, we need to do something about it. Don't let go. I think I was saying to Amanda last night, sometimes you need to keep the information back. When we did that conference 7 years ago, I had some brilliant case studies. And I dropped them into the papers one day, as the news was running wild on this, but I kept a few of them back. And when it was sliding off the public agenda, a month later, I dropped them in again. And so it suddenly came back again on the public agenda. And then I worked with the BBC and other broadcasters so that they did a fly on the wall a year later. So you just keep doing that, constant